Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Stephanie Cox. The Department of Homeland Security launching an investigation into security at former President Trump's rally. What they're trying to find out about the Secret Service. Federal prosecutors move to drop obstruction charges against some January 6 defendants. What made them reverse course? From detractors to supporters, former critics and opponents of former President Trump now call on all Republicans to support the party's presidential ticket. Chinese smart cars could be collecting sensitive data and sending it back to Beijing. We'll tell you what the U.S. government plans to do. And the State Department updates its Iran travel advisory to the highest level of caution. What dangers is the department warning about? Roughly 40,000 customers remain without power in Texas. An energy expert tells NTD about the risks of a vulnerable grid. CBS reports that Vice President Kamala Harris has agreed to 3 potential dates for a debate with J.D. Vance. The network will host the event on July 23rd, August 12th, or August 13th. Former President Trump selected the Ohio senator as his running mate on Monday. Trump and President Biden are scheduled to debate a second time on September 10th. And in a change of course, federal prosecutors are moving to drop obstruction charges against some January 6 defendants. This comes in the wake of a recent Supreme Court decision. Last month, the Supreme Court narrowed how the prosecution can use the obstruction charge. The justices ruled it can only apply to impairing or destroying evidence, such as documents. In the wake of the ruling, January 6 defendants could seek to have their convictions, sentences, or plea deals on this charge vacated. The court decision is also leading to misdemeanor plea deals for some of the defendants. Some members of the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, who are not charged with other felony offenses, are benefiting the most. Presidential candidate Trump said if he's elected in November, he will stop the January 6 prosecutions and issue pardons. And the Republican National Convention has projected a renewed sense of unity within the Republican Party. Former critics and opponents of Trump have rallied around the Trump-Vance presidential ticket. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the details on this new tone being set by Republicans ahead of November's election.
The Republican National Convention has projected a renewed sense of unity within Republicans. Former President Donald Trump, who has been seen by some within the party as a divisive figure, has rallied the support of some of his most prominent critics. For example, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis went from saying this in January,
"I don't think Donald Trump ultimately can win an election,"
to praising former President Donald Trump's leadership style at this week's Republican National Convention.
"We need a commander-in-chief who can lead 24 hours a day and 7 days a week."
Former UN ambassador and former Governor Nikki Haley, who was the last contender to bow out of this year's Republican presidential primaries, argued in March against former President Donald Trump's viability as a candidate for the Republican Party.
How much more losing do we have to do before we realize maybe Donald Trump is the problem?
And during this week's convention, Nikki Haley asked her supporters to unite behind former President Donald Trump.
You don't have to agree with Trump 100% of the time to vote for him. I'm here tonight because we have a country to save. And a unified Republican Party is essential for saving her.
This year's calls for unity within the Republican Party are drastically different from 2016, when Texas Senator Ted Cruz was booed off stage for asking voters to vote their conscience instead of supporting Trump.
Stand and speak and vote your conscience. Vote for candidates up and down the ticket who you trust to defend our freedom and to be faithful to the Constitution.
8 years later, the Texas senator was received with applause as he prayed for the former president's safety.
God bless Donald J. Trump.
Former registered Democrats like Vivek Ramaswamy and Tulsi Gabbard have also come to support the former president since the last Republican National Convention. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
And for more on this RNC event, we're joined by NTD News contributor Mike Leon. He's the Policy and Strategy Director of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation and host of the News Commentary podcast, Can We Please Talk? Mike, good to see you. What stands out to you from the first 2 days of the Republican National Convention?
Good to see you, Steph, as always. You know, it's so funny that package just played before because you can see the 8-year difference in what Senator Ted Cruz said back then and what he's saying now. That's kind of one of the big things that stood out to me. I know we're going to get into this in just a second, but, you know, the folks that ran during the primary season against the former president were speaking last night. I thought Ron DeSantis actually delivered some good jabs and actually gave some more data and some more policy around the difference between what the Biden administration is doing now versus what the Trump administration did previously. Look, I'm going to say this when the DNC comes around in August. There's an element of performance in all of this, right? You want to deliver a message, but also rouse the crowd and deliver some jabs and jokes and things like that. And I think in these first couple days, I've been looking more for the vision of why independents, moderates, should vote for the Republican platform. I'm hopeful that we see it in the final two speeches on Wednesday and Thursday of the vice president and president respectively, because I think so far in these couple of days, it's just kind of been, this is the warm-up show, Steph, right? Like everyone's kind of going out there and saying why they're here and why they're supporting the former president, but nothing outside of Tim Scott's, you know, if you didn't believe in God before, this is why you should believe in him now line has really stood out to me from a speaker's perspective.
And on the note of the speech tonight, what do you expect J.D. Vance to focus on?
Well, I think, Vance, you know, you were just saying it at the top of the show about the vice presidential debates that he will have with Kamala Harris. I expect him to hit hard on the Biden administration as just somebody who's in D.C., he's working in the Senate. He sees how all of this is unfolding. He sees the policy failures or lack thereof action-wise on certain things. I think he needs to hammer home what a Trump-Vance ticket would do differently. I would like to hear that first and foremost. I think he's also probably going to touch on the fact that he's been called out because he has been critical of the former president in a previous life just, 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I think he'll touch on some of that as well, speaking to folks familiar with his thinking on that front. And he hasn't shied away from it. He's been asked it on different interviews. And he said, look, this is the way I felt back then. This is the way I feel now. Right. So this pivot, this is why the country should pivot, in his opinion. So I think you'll hear both of those things tonight from his speech.
And we'll be watching that very closely. And of course, former President Trump's speech coming up on Thursday. So hopefully speak with you soon about all of this. Thank you so much, Mike Leon.
Thanks, Steph.
And NTD will be covering the Republican National Convention tonight and tomorrow. We'll have on-the-ground access, in-depth analysis, and a lot more prepared for you during our live special coverage of The Nation Decides 2024. Join Steve Lance and Tiffany Meyer tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern. During the RNC yesterday, police shot and killed a man near the event venue. They responded to an incident in which the knife-wielding suspect was about to attack somebody.
He's got a knife. Yes, he does.
As you see in this police body cam video, 5 officers from the Columbus, Ohio Police Department saw the suspect holding 2 knives. Running toward him, they gave commands for the man to drop the weapons. When he refused, the officers opened fire. A pair of knives were found at the scene. The officers from Columbus, Ohio are part of a large contingent of law enforcement personnel from multiple agencies. They are assisting with security in and around the RNC event venue. People living in the area are questioning why those out-of-town officers are patrolling their neighborhood, which is a mile away from the convention. Milwaukee's mayor defends the officers' actions.
Yesterday afternoon, the Republican presidential nominee gave me a call. Mr. Trump had positive things to say about his experience so far here in Milwaukee. He shared his gratitude for the security and for law enforcement preparations. I did appreciate the call from Mr. Trump, and I again wished him a speedy recovery from his recent injuries.
The mayor and the city's police chief have said the shooting doesn't appear to be related to the RNC. A relative of the suspect, Linda Sharp, identified the man as her cousin, Samuel Sharp. She said her cousin lives in a nearby tent encampment that is known to local police.
And more updates coming in about the assassination attempt on former President Trump. The Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General is opening an investigation into the Secret Service's handling of the security at the Trump rally.
In a brief notice posted to its website, the agency said the objective of the probe is to evaluate the Secret Service's process for securing Trump's campaign event. President Biden has already directed a separate independent review. Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle recently answered more questions about security at the event.
So Secret Service respects local law enforcement, and we could not do our job either investigatively or on our protective mission without them. At that particular site, we divided up areas of responsibility, but the Secret Service is solely responsible for the design and the implementation and the execution of the site. And that's what I was trying to stress, was that we just divided up areas of responsibility, and they provided support to those areas of responsibility.
She said the roof of the building used by the shooter has a slope, so it was too dangerous for Secret Service agents to secure. She said the decision was made to secure the building from inside. Eyewitness video filmed moments before the attack shows rallygoers noticing the shooter on the roof.
And we're learning new details about the suspected shooter who tried to assassinate former President Trump. Law enforcement says crooks first aroused suspicion about 3 hours before the shooting at the rally venue. Authorities say he passed through security carrying a rangefinder.
Investigators have not been able to identify a motive for Crook's attack at the rally in Butler County, Pennsylvania, and are piecing together more of the puzzle. Law enforcement says the suspect was at the security screening area for the rally at 3 p.m. on Saturday, roughly 3 hours prior to the shooting. They say he first aroused suspicion when passing through the magnetometers carrying a rangefinder. Security personnel kept an eye on him until he left the secure area. Investigators are unsure of where Crooks went after he left the screening area, but think he went to his car to get the rifle. Authorities say he gained access to the roof of the building by climbing onto an air conditioning unit.
There he is right there. Right there, see him?
He was seen by witnesses on the roof and one of the counter sniper teams on the scene. A senior law enforcement official says one of the 4 counter sniper teams saw Crooks looking at their position through the rangefinder. Around the same time, witnesses warned police Crooks was on the roof of the American Glass Research Building. Video analysis shows the shooting started about 2 minutes later. The FBI says it's cracked into Crooks' phone, scoured his computer, car, and home, and interviewed more than 100 people. The FBI says the investigation is still in its early stages. Officials said there was no indication that the 20-year-old suspect had any mental illness. The shooting is being treated as both an assassination attempt and potential domestic terrorism. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
And House Speaker Mike Johnson announced today that he would establish a task force in the House to investigate the assassination attempt on Trump. He said that existing investigations would be centralized in the Speaker's office. Here's Johnson at the RNC last night.
In the wake of the assassination attempt on the life of President Trump, everyone hear me clearly and listen to me at home and make no mistake. The House is conducting an immediate and thorough investigation of these tragic events, and that work has already begun. The American people deserve to know the truth, and we will ensure accountability. I promise you that. I promise you that.
President Biden is back on the campaign trail, where he's repeating calls to cool political rhetoric. After the attempt on former president's life, Biden says that politics has gotten too heated. Here's more.
President Biden addressed the NAACP convention in Las Vegas on Tuesday, continuing his call to calm the rhetoric on both sides.
You got to remember, in America, we're not enemies, we're friends, we're neighbors, we're fellow Americans.
After the attempted assassination Saturday, Biden's campaign said it was pausing its TV ads. Biden said he spoke to Trump on the phone, but that didn't stop him from laying into Trump over his policies. He said Trump enacted tax cuts as president that overwhelmingly benefited the super wealthy and drove up the federal debt.
He left no room for us to do what we should be doing. Invest in things that affect people's lives, like child care, elder care, and so much more, that grow the economy and help people.
Biden's appearance at the NAACP convention is part of his effort to reach out to black voters ahead of November. The NAACP is one of the oldest and largest civil rights groups in America. Black voters overwhelmingly supported Biden in 2020, but support has been decreasing this election cycle. Biden also spoke about what he thinks it should mean to condemn political violence. That includes banning the weapon used Saturday at the Trump rally.
An AR-15 was used in the shooting Donald Trump, just as it was an assault weapon that killed so many others, including children. It's time to outlaw them.
Biden's trip comes as some Democrats are expressing doubts about his suitability as presidential candidate following his debate with Trump last month. But Biden has rejected calls to step aside, saying he's all in.
Hopefully, with age, I've demonstrated a little bit of wisdom. Here's what I do know. I know how to tell the truth. I know right from wrong. I know how to do this job. And I know the good Lord hasn't brought us this far to leave us now.
Biden is set to speak to Latino voters in Las Vegas next.
And next, the Georgia Court of Appeals will hear arguments to disqualify Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis only after the presidential election. That means the case is on pause until after November. Lawyers for former President Trump and other co-defendants argue that Willis's relationship with former special prosecutor Nathan Wade was inappropriate. They requested to submit oral arguments to disqualify Willis. The court said yesterday it'll only do so in December, a month after the election. The appeal is to be decided by a 3-panel judge. The panel then has until mid-March to rule. Once the judges rule, the losing side could ask the Georgia Supreme Court to consider an appeal. Trump and 18 co-defendants were charged with racketeering and election fraud. That's for their actions after the 2020 election. The former president has pleaded not guilty. When we come back, roughly 40,000 homes and businesses remain without power in Houston. An energy expert tells NTD about the risks of a vulnerable grid. National security concerns over China's smart cars, collecting sensitive data and sending it back to Beijing. How the U.S. plans to respond, that and more after the break.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
They're just young people, hungry, homeless, and vulnerable. Abused youth often feel safer on the street. Now, more than ever, that's the most dangerous place of all. Covenant House is helping young adults facing homelessness. We're providing safe shelter to thousands, but the need is overwhelming, and no young person is ever turned away. Please call or go online now with your gift of $19 a month to help a young person. You'll provide safe shelter, hot meals, and medical care. Your gift will show them they're loved. Homeless young people are afraid and alone with nowhere else to turn.
You want to know that there's somewhere you can go that's safe. So the Covenant House did that for us.
Please call now with your gift of $19 a month. We'll send you this blanket as a reminder of the comfort your gift provides a young person tonight. Please don't wait. Your gift is the lifeline a young person needs now. Call the number on your screen or go online to safeplacetosleep.org. Thank you for saving precious lives.
How do you feel about where America's at this point in time?
We need help.
Very, very divided.
Divided.
Divided. Scary.
Really bad. What gives you a sense of hope?
My family.
Make connections with people from all over the world.
Faith in God. I really believe in God.
Yes, there is hope.
Our only hope is in God.
There's a very important movie called The Firing Squad that you must see.
There has never been a better time for the message of hope that shines through this movie.
Together, we can save America.
New regulations coming for Chinese internet-connected cars in the U.S. The Commerce Department says this is a matter of national security and Americans' privacy. Smart cars can know a driver's phone record, driving patterns, and physical surroundings. For Chinese smart vehicles, this means that the Chinese Communist Party also has access to this information. The cars can also be remotely accessed or disabled. And it's an economical issue as well. China is flooding the U.S. market with cheap cars backed by CCP funding as it attempts to infiltrate various sectors of the U.S. economy. Experts warn that this could collapse America's auto industry, which is central to the American economy. The federal government already quadrupled Chinese imported electric vehicle tariffs from 25% to 100% in May. The Commerce Department is expected to propose additional rules and restrictions in August. And the Commerce Department plans to award Taiwan's Global Wafers up to $400 million to increase production of silicon wafers. The government grant would establish the first domestic production of 300-millimeter discs for advanced semiconductors. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the details.
The new grant is part of the Biden administration's efforts to boost the chip supply chain. The planned subsidy would support $4 billion in investments by Global Wafers in Texas and Missouri. Silicon wafers are a crucial component of advanced semiconductors. 5 major companies, including Global Wafers, control more than 80% of the global 300-millimeter manufacturing market. They account for about 90% of silicon wafers produced in East Asia. In 2022, Congress approved the CHIPS and Science Act to boost domestic semiconductor output. The bill allocated more than $50 billion for research and a manufacturing subsidies program. The CHIPS Subsidy Initiative has provided $30 billion so far. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And the State Department has updated its Iran travel advisory to Level 4, Do Not Travel, the highest level of caution. The warning cited terrorism, potential civil unrest, kidnapping, and the arbitrary arrest of American citizens in the Middle Eastern country. In January, an ISIS terrorist cell infiltrated crowds gathered near the grave of an Iranian commander and set off explosives. About 100 people were killed and scores of others were wounded. Iran often detains and imprisons American citizens as well, particularly those with dual U.S.-Iranian citizenship. Students, journalists, business travelers, and academics are frequent targets of the regime. Last year, the Biden administration paid a $6 billion ransom in exchange for the release of 5 American hostages. And more than 2 million homes and businesses in Texas lost power last week after Hurricane Beryl ripped out trees and knocked down power lines. Roughly 40,000 homes and businesses remain without power in Houston 9 days after the storm. NTD's Andrew Thomas spoke with an energy expert to discuss the risks of a vulnerable grid.
Houston residents are beginning to get frustrated with the extent of the power outages caused by Hurricane Beryl. Many, including Texas Governor Greg Abbott, are questioning CenterPoint's preparedness. Energy reporter Robert Bryce says the latest outage is renewing focus on the grid's critical role.
So when we have an outage that's that big, it reminds us, in fact, that everything we do, touch, read, eat, wear, depends on electricity. And then finally, I think it reminds us that how fragile the grid is, that we take it for granted, but this network of networks that we call the electric grid is, I'm not going to say it's rickety, but it is fragile.
What can utility companies like CenterPoint and what can the government do to ensure that our grid is more resilient?
I think it's not just about the poles and the wires, it's also about the transformers. And this is one of the other key areas that has been identified as a vulnerability for the electric grid overall, is having a stock of pole-mounted, pad-mounted, high-power transformers that can be deployed when you have outages like this or acts of sabotage.
Bryce says U.S. adversaries take note when vulnerabilities to the grid are exposed, whether that's due to a storm or other factors. America's enemies could leverage those weak points in a potential conflict.
I'm sure the Chinese Communist Party and the Russians and the Iranians read our newspapers. I'm sure they know what's going on, right? It doesn't take any a rocket scientist to understand what it means when the electric grid goes down for big cities or large areas in the United States. It just brings the entire society to its knees.
The Texas Public Utility Commission has launched an investigation into CenterPoint's storm preparation and response. The governor has given the utility company until the end of July to submit plans to protect the power supply through the rest of the hurricane season. CenterPoint is the state's largest power provider and has defended its response and speed of restoring outages. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And next, in lighter news, the 2024 Paris Olympics are kicking off next week, and Mongolia's national uniform for the Games is dazzling the City of Lights. Let's take a look. The outfits feature embroidered vests, pleated robes, and accessories inspired by traditional attire. Michelle and Amazonka designed the uniforms. Based in the capital of Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, the label, produces couture and ready-to-wear garments. Designers hope that they express the essence of Mongolian traditional culture. The brand calls the Olympic attire contemporary light. The Mongolian National Olympic Committee says each outfit took 20 hours to craft. Wow, what a sight. Thank you for watching NTD Newsroom. I'm Stephanie Cox. Tune in to our special coverage of the Republican National Convention at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 Pacific.